Hey guys, I'm back. I'm sorry that I had to cut that video off short. I tried to pause it, but it ended up just stopping. I'm not sure why. So I had to just basically continue on part 3 as I didn't really want to start recording all over again. I needed to go get some water. My voice is still a little hoarse here, and I have a little bit of a hard time speaking, but I'm doing a little better. But I was telling you, talking about how I basically nonstop played Super Mario Brothers, and I kept playing it, and I remember being at World 8 too, and I couldn't beat it. But my dad was telling me, when you beat it that game, well, you can go ahead and get another game. But I want you to finish this first. I mean, he wanted me just to play what I had and enjoy it and get the most out of it, rather than just keep getting more and more games and getting kind of greedy and just not appreciating what I have. So I remember liking that. As the dog just went crazy at somebody walking down the road. So sorry about that. But he ended up playing it a lot too, and he eventually ended up finishing the game too, long after me. And I ended up beating it way before. And I remember I would help my dad in his garage because he's a carpenter. He did work, and he would pay me a couple dollars an hour as a kid, and give me a little bit of spending money, just stuff like that. And I remember challenging him one time. I said, when you beat the game, I'll give you a whole day of free help out there, just kind of throwing around. And of course, he did beat it one day when I came home from school, and he was home from work a little bit early. And I was like, oh no, I have to help him in the garage. And I'm like, oh, it's all boring, and sweeping floors and hauling lumber and wood, and it's like, whatever. But we had some really good times with that, though. And I eventually beat it, and I remember this talking to, I had a teacher in fourth grade. When I was in fourth grade, Mrs. Warden was my teacher, but then there was an assistant teacher who was like a little helper that would help us with our math and stuff while we were, main teacher was going over the stuff. And I remember telling her, because I had went out the night before and I had like $35 in cash, and I ended up buying a copy of Ms. Pac-Man. And my mom was telling me, are you sure you want to buy this? Do you want to wait a few more dollars for your allowance and get Super Mario Brothers 3? And I'm like, no, I want this. And of course, it was just my excitement getting the best of me. And we played the heck out of Ms. Pac-Man and loved it, but it still really wasn't Mario 3. But I remember going to school the next day and telling the assistant teacher, Mrs. Bryden, telling her, yeah, I got another game now. And she's like, yeah, now you got 3 games to play between Mario and Duck Hunt and Pac-Man. And she was just the nicest teacher. And I remember telling her that, talking to her about Nintendo, and she told me she had a Nintendo and that she said she didn't really play it much. And I remember just being so excited about it, and all the people in school talking about Nintendo, and I ended up hearing about the Jaguar and the links just between my 4th grade friends at school and stuff. And that was pretty cool. I loved it, but I remember just really wanting more games. And Ms. Pac-Man was really good, but we never could finish it. But I played it quite a bit, and I loved that game. It was just a lot of fun. But I remember her finally telling me, if you get good report cards every week, you keep your grades up, I'll let you borrow Super Mario Brothers 3 for, you can even borrow it for a couple months. And I would, how many people in school, this teacher will let them borrow Nintendo games if they get good grades? So I told my parents, and they're like, that's fine, that's fair enough. You get good grades, you can borrow all those games from her. And I remember her telling me, I got good grades, and I showed it to her. She's like, you know what, I'm sorry, I don't know where Mario 3 is. I lent it to my brother, I haven't gotten it back yet. And she let me borrow RC Pro-Am. So we ended up playing that. Nothing beat Mario 3. It just didn't beat it, but we played the heck out of RC Pro-Am a lot. Me and my friends would come over before school. They'd all get out of their house early, come hang out for a little while before we left for the bus. And we played the heck out of RC Pro-Am. And we really liked it. It ended up being one of the better games I ended up with back then, because all I ended up with was junk. I'd always scrounge for allowance money and buy whatever cheap games I could find, excuse me again, in garage sales. So RC Pro-Am ended up being one of the better ones. But I gave it back to her, and I remember her telling me that, lending it to me again a little while later, and she said, you know what, you can go ahead and borrow it for the summer. She told me that when school got out. And I was like, wow, I mean, that was really exciting. I mean, I was just thoroughly happy. Yeah, I got to borrow a Nintendo game from my teacher for the whole summer. I mean, how could you beat that? And I do remember giving it back when I started 5th grade. Gave it to her, just really telling her how much I was appreciative of her and just how, thankful I was. But I remember, scrounging for cheap games. I got my license, or not my license, but I got my allowance. And remember, my mom was renting some movies in Blockbuster, and I saw a bunch of cheap games when they're blowing their Nintendo games out, probably, 93-ish, whatever, sometime. And I ended up picking up Cybernoid because it was really cheap. And just because I got it for like $10 back in like 93, which was a great deal for video games back then. And we played that a lot too, and even my dad played that. That ended up being a pretty good game. It was really just too hard. I never could finish it, but it ended up being a game that we really liked. I had a lot of fun with it. And I still think that it's a pretty well-made game. It's an port from the Commodore 64. But I ended up getting kind of bored with it because it was just too difficult. So I traded it to a friend. I was just happy to get rid of it because I wanted something else to play. And I don't even remember what I traded it for, to be honest. But I got something else, and it probably wasn't even a good game. But my mom babysat these two boys that were one was my brother's age, about 6 years younger than me. The other one was about a year or two younger than me at the time. And they had a whole bunch of Nintendo games, and I think they had just gotten a Sega Genesis at the time. And his dad was selling the games out for him, and I wanted Adam's Family really bad because I remember playing it over there. And he wanted $25 for it, so I kept giving him $5 in my allowance each week, and I eventually got Adam's Family, and that ended up being one of our favorite games. We never did beat it, but I got really close. Me and my dad both played that. And I know that Adam's Family isn't the best game ever made, but I still have really fond memories of it. And I don't think it's a bad game. It's very rough, it's choppy, it ain't perfect, but it's still one of those games I have great memories of, and I still think it's relatively fun to play, even though it's definitely not one of the better NES games out there. But I ended up buying a lot of just cheap games, in a garage sale at church. I ended up buying, for 50 cents a piece, I was ecstatic. I ended up buying Skate or Die, and I got one other game, and then I actually ended up getting a copy. We were doing a fundraiser at church to go on a youth trip to Washington, D.C. So this girl was selling Nintendo games, and she actually had an Aladdin deck enhancer with one of the Dizzy games, Dizzy the Adventurer. And I was asking her about it, and she had no idea what it was, so she's like, you can just have it. And I was beyond excited, and that's probably one of my fondest memories ever, is finding, even as a collector, I still don't have an Aladdin deck enhancer anymore. I ended up giving it to a friend long ago, and it was stolen from him. And we were so fascinated by that, so fascinated by just trying to figure out what to do in Dizzy. And it was just a really cool game that it was really too hard for us to get very far in it. But we really loved it. It was the pack-in Dizzy game, whatever that one was. I don't remember the name of it. But I could say as a child, when I wasn't a collector, I did find an Aladdin deck enhancer in a garage sale for free. So that's definitely one of the better memories I have of that. And probably the fondest memory and what would turn into my favorite game of all time was when this guy Jeremy and his brother Chris were selling their Nintendo games, and they were selling them for $10-15 a piece. And I ended up borrowing like Ghostbusters 2, and I ended up borrowing some other ones, but they weren't that good, and I gave them back. But I wanted Super Off-Road really bad, but he couldn't end up finding it. So he ended up wanting $15 for it, but he had a copy of Zelda 2. And he's like, alright, for now, just go ahead and borrow this, because I had given him some money for it. And he's like, well, I don't know where it's at, just borrow this for now, I want more for it, but just borrow it. So we ended up playing it, and we didn't know what the heck to do with it. I had played the first Zelda before that, but never really beat it, never really got into that type of game until, a lot later on in my gaming life. I just liked platformers and little shooters and just simple, very basic games to figure out at the time. But we got Zelda 2, and we kept playing it, and there was something so, enticing and so interesting and alluring about it. We didn't know how to save it, We thought our cartridge was bad. And then eventually we finally figured out how to save it. We had no manual, no walkthrough, no nothing, and no idea what to even do in the game. And little by little we started figuring it out. And eventually I got some basic little hint guides and stuff, and old Nintendo Power hint guides and stuff, and we ended up making more and more and more progress in it. And we actually ended up beating it. Finally, I remember playing it and just loving every minute of it. I remember one day coming home from church, and we decided to play Nintendo, and my dad played it, and we were both right at the end, and we just could not beat the Link Shadow back then at the end. Finally, my dad beat it, and he actually beat it before me. It was one of the only few games that he ever beat before me, and I was so jealous at the time, and I eventually went back and beat it probably a few days or a week later. And we played that game, and we played the second quest over and over and over again. And that remains my favorite Nintendo game of all time. I know people hate Zelda 2. A lot of people do. I think it's a brilliant game. I think I can't find a flaw with it. You say what you want, but I can't find a flaw with it. We love it. And it was his favorite game. He liked it because the enemies were more intelligent. And, it was just harder. He liked the challenge. And I liked the same, the music was awesome. And I can play that game over and over again. It doesn't bore me. To this day, I've probably beaten it, 15 times. I've actually even done the 4-heart and magic container challenge and completed it that way too. And that's definitely a gaming accomplishment. But, I ended up with a few other games. I ended up finally getting Mario 3 for $10, and it ended up never working properly. I always had a hard time playing it. I finally did beat it. I loved it. We played the heck out of that. Mario 3 was great, and I remember World 6-5, the one where you have to have a raccoon tail to beat the level, and 7-8 where you have to be invincible to beat the whole level. Really taking me. I beat the game before I beat those two levels. And I remember back then, my mom would only give me an hour a day, but she said if you're playing with your brother and sister, and that we were babysitting 2 girls at the time, my mom did, you can have an extra half hour. And I remember using the extra half hour at time to show them that I could beat the game. And bragging to them, and they were really, they loved watching, and they played too. We would play, I eventually got Mario 2, we played that, played the original Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles a lot. Turtles 2 I played a lot. I eventually beat that on my own without cheating, which is, I can't do anymore. I cannot beat that anymore. I've never beaten the first Ninja Turtles, though I've gotten very close. On my own, I've gotten to the very end. I still need to beat that. A friend at school sold me Fester's Quest. That ended up being one of my all-time favorite games. It still is. I beat that about 10 years ago, and I absolutely love that game. People hate it, but I love it. And I got that. I got Cubert. We played that a lot. We borrowed a bunch of games from Paperboy. There was a couple others. I ended up playing my mom rented Mega Man 2 for us and Mario 3 before I had it. I remember getting grounded from Nintendo games because me and 2 friends were playing it all night long, those 2 games, when my mom was having some kind of Tupperware party, and my friends' moms were over, and we played it so long, my dad's like, you can't play this long, and I got grounded for it. And but those are probably my fondest gaming memories, and the ones I have the most fond childhood memories with is those games. I had played plenty of others. I played Spelunker and remember being fascinated about that. I remember playing Double Dragon and really liking that. But between like Mega Man 2 back then, Mario Brothers, Mario 3, maybe Captain Skyhawk, Chip and Dale when we played it at my cousin's house, Zelda 2, Zelda 1, those games back then probably represented my favorite games in my limited gaming, experience back then. So that's the stuff that I have, that is my absolute fondest memories. So I have probably one more part I'm going to go through with NES memories before I, conclude my vlog. I'll save the rest of the stuff for another time, but I have a few more NES memories and some stuff later on, also some very fond memories and some games I'm very fond of, but I'm going to save that for the final part. I will see you then. Later.